It was just after midnight. The streets were empty, and the city felt wrong. Jonathan Roumie walked alone, his jacket pulled tight against the cold. He wasn't heading anywhere in particular, just walking, trying to clear his head. A role had just fallen through. A friendship had ended in silence. And the God he'd been praying to for weeks, still felt painfully absent. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. The only sound was the faint hum of a street lamp flickering above him. It pulsed in an uneven rhythm, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and breathe. Jonathan exhaled, his breath turning into a cloud of white in the winter air. "All right, God," he muttered under his breath, "I'm tired of talking to walls. If you're there, say something. Anything." Silence. He reached the end of the block and turned down a narrow alley, the kind you'd normally avoid, but tonight he didn't care. Trash bins lined the walls. The air was heavier here, damp and cold. He stopped halfway through, staring at the ground. The weight in his chest was unbearable. "You know what?" His voice cracked. "Forget it. Maybe you're just not listening. Or maybe, I'm just not worth listening to." He laughed, but it was sharp, hollow. The kind of laugh that hides something breaking. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It wasn't a voice. Wasn't footsteps. It was something like wind, but not moving the air around him. It was moving through him. Jonathan froze. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A faint warmth began to rise from his chest, as if someone had lit a small flame inside him. It was subtle at first, but grew steadily, pressing out against his ribs. He turned, scanning the alley. No one there. "Okay," he whispered, "this is weird." Then he saw it. At the far end of the alley, a light. Not the pale orange of the street lamps. This was white, pure, unblinking, almost too bright to look at. Jonathan blinked hard, thinking it was just his eyes playing tricks. But the light didn't fade. It moved, slowly, steadily, closer. His chest tightened. Every instinct told him to run, but his legs felt locked in place. The warmth inside him grew. Not a burning that hurt, a burning that felt alive. When the light was close enough to reach the edge of the shadows, it stopped. Jonathan's breath caught. Inside the light was the faint outline of a figure. Not sharp, not fully formed, but there. Human. "Who's there?" Jonathan's voice trembled. No answer. Then, not in his ears, but inside his mind, came a voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even in words at first. It was like being known. Completely, utterly, in a single instant, and then the words followed. Clear, gentle. "I have been here all along." Jonathan's knees nearly gave out. He swallowed hard. God. The figure didn't move, but the light seemed to pulse, not like a flicker, but like a heartbeat. "I have never left you." Jonathan felt something hot roll down his cheek. His hands shook, but not from fear. "You don't understand," he said, voice breaking. "I've messed up. I've pushed you away so many times. I've failed you more than I can count." The warmth swelled until it felt like it was holding him upright. And the voice came again. "I know." Jonathan's chest heaved. "And you still," he couldn't finish. "Yes." The word hit him like a wave. Not crushing him, but wrapping around him, pulling him into something far bigger, far stronger than himself. He couldn't explain how, but he knew, this was real. This wasn't a dream, or an overactive imagination, or a trick of the light. This was presence. And it was holy. Jonathan sank to his knees right there in the alley. The cold concrete bit through his jeans, but he barely noticed. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. The answer came, steady and sure. "You never did. That's why it's called grace." Jonathan's heart pounded. The warmth inside him reached his fingertips, his face, even his breath. It felt like the moment might stretch forever. But then, just as slowly as it came, the light began to fade. Jonathan reached forward, almost desperate. "Wait, don't go. I am with you always." The light vanished. The alley was dark again. The hum of the street lamp returned. But Jonathan knew, something inside him had been changed forever. Jonathan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, replaying every detail. The light, the figure, the voice. By sunrise, he still wasn't sure if he'd completely lost his mind or if he'd just stepped into something far more real than anything he'd ever known. His phone lit up with texts, friends asking if he was coming to an audition, someone reminding him about a dinner, his mother sending a heart emoji. He stared at them but didn't reply. His thoughts were somewhere else entirely. When he finally walked into the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the blinds felt sharper, almost alive. Even the smell of the coffee seemed deeper. He poured a cup and sat at the table, gripping it with both hands, trying to ground himself. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Maybe I imagined it. Asterisk. Maybe it was exhaustion, stress, the cold. Asterisk. Maybe I wanted it to be real so badly that I convinced myself it was. Asterisk. Jonathan rubbed his eyes. You're losing it, man, he muttered. Still, part of him knew better. That warmth, that knowing, was not something you could hallucinate. It had been too specific, too personal. Later that afternoon, he met up with David, a longtime friend who'd known him through every high and low. They sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, steam rising from their mugs. You look different, David said, tilting his head. Like, not tired different. More like, lit up different. Jonathan hesitated. Something happened last night. David leaned in. Okay, what kind of something? Jonathan's voice lowered. I think I saw God. David blinked, then blinked again. Like, metaphorically. No, I mean, I don't know. It wasn't like a dude walking up and shaking my hand. It was, light, and a voice, inside my head, but not like my own thoughts. It was, he stopped, frustrated. I can't explain it. David stared for a moment, searching his face. You sure it wasn't a dream? Jonathan shook his head. I wasn't asleep. I was freezing in an alley in the middle of the night. I felt it. I heard it. He clenched his jaw. I know what I experienced. David sat back, letting out a slow breath. Okay, so what now? That was the question Jonathan had been avoiding all day. If this was real, then what? Was he supposed to change something? Do something? Tell people? Or was it just a personal thing? But even as those questions swirled, something inside him whispered, it wasn't just for you. Asterisk. That night, Jonathan pulled out an old leather-bound journal. He flipped past years of scribbled prayers and unfinished thoughts until he found a blank page. He started writing everything he'd seen, heard, and felt. Halfway through, his hands started trembling. Not from fear, from the weight of the words. I have never left you. He stopped and stared at that sentence for a long time. Those 6 words had already begun to tear down walls he'd spent years building. Over the next few days, the encounter refused to leave him. It colored every conversation, every errand, every silent moment. Even the ordinary felt like it carried a shadow of something holy. But the more he carried it, the more the tension grew. At an industry dinner later that week, he found himself surrounded by people laughing, trading stories, making deals. And yet he felt distant, like he was on the outside looking in. Jonathan, someone called. You're quiet tonight, man. Everything okay? He forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. Inside, though, he was wrestling. Because here was the thing. If God had actually broken into his life like that, then every decision from this point on had to mean something. And the truth, that terrified him. That weekend, he met up with an older mentor, Michael, someone who'd been like a father figure. They sat in Michael's living room, the smell of cinnamon tea in the air. Jonathan told him everything. Michael listened without interrupting, his eyes steady, his hands folded. When Jonathan finished, Michael nodded slowly. Do you want my honest thought? Jonathan braced himself. Yeah, I believe you, Michael said simply. Jonathan blinked. You do. Michael smiled faintly. You think you're the first person to see him like that. Jonathan, I had my own encounter when I was your age. Not the same way, but just as undeniable. It shook my life apart and put it back together differently. Jonathan leaned forward. So, what did you do afterward? Michael's smile faded. That's the hard part. Encounters are gifts, but they're also calls. The question is, will you answer? Jonathan sat back, his pulse quickening. Answer how? Michael's eyes didn't leave his. By letting it change you. And by telling the truth about it, even when people laugh, or walk away, or tell you you're crazy. Jonathan's stomach tightened. That sounds dangerous. Michael's voice softened. It is, but it's worth it. Jonathan drove home that night in silence, Michael's words echoing in his mind. Telling the truth, even when it costs you. Asterisk. That was the tension now. He could keep this to himself, treat it like a private moment. Or he could step out and risk everything, his career, his reputation, by talking about something the world might reject outright. And deep down, he already knew what the voice in the alley would say. I am with you always. Asterisk. The question was, would that be enough? The decision came quicker than he expected. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. No booming voice. No lightning bolt, just a quiet morning, sunlight spilling across his kitchen table, and the sudden, unshakable thought, it's time. Asterisk. Jonathan didn't even realize he was gripping his phone until his knuckles turned white. He opened the camera app, stared at the blank recording screen, and felt his chest tighten. This is crazy, he muttered. Then hit record. The red dot blinked. His own reflection stared back at him, eyes tired but alive. I've never shared anything like this before, he began, voice low. But a few nights ago, something happened to me. Something I can't explain, but I can't ignore. He spoke slowly, carefully, like he was building a bridge one plank at a time. He described the alley, the light, the voice, the words, I have never left you. Asterisk. And then he said it, the part he'd been afraid to speak aloud. I believe I encountered God. And I don't mean in a vague, metaphorical way. I mean, him, real, alive, speaking, and I think he wanted me to tell you that he hasn't left you either. He stopped recording before he could talk himself out of it. It took him an hour to press, post. By noon, the video had 200 views. By evening, it had 20,000. By midnight, 500,000. The comments were a tidal wave. Some were deeply moved. I needed to hear this today. Asterisk. This brought me to tears. Asterisk. Others, not so much. What drugs were you on, dude? Asterisk. Fake. Clout chasing. Asterisk. You're an actor. You know how to fake emotion. Asterisk. Jonathan read them. All, heart pounding. The next morning, his phone rang. It was his agent. What is going on? She demanded. Do you have any idea what you just did? Jonathan swallowed. I told the truth. You told millions of people you saw God in an alley. Do you know how that sounds? You're going to scare off studios. You're going to get labeled as. She stopped, searching for the word. Unstable. Jonathan's voice was steady. Then maybe those aren't the studios I need to work with. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, you're making a mistake. The call ended. That night, Jonathan walked into a small church on the edge of town. He hadn't planned to speak. He just wanted to sit in the back, breathe in the scent of old wood and candle wax, and listen. But halfway through, the pastor spotted him and invited him to the front. Jonathan froze, then stood. I'm not here to preach, he said softly. But I had something happen to me recently. Something that changed everything. He told the story again, this time, not into a phone, but into a room of faces watching intently. When he finished, a young man in the front row was crying. I've been praying for a sign, the man whispered. I think you just gave it to me. Jonathan felt that same warmth from the alley, wrapping around the moment. But the backlash wasn't done. The next day, an entertainment blog ran a headline. Actor Jonathan Roumie claims direct conversation with God. Is this the end of his career? Talk shows mocked him. Social media argued about him. Some called him brave, others called him delusional. Then came the invitation that would change everything. A primetime talk show host, one known for skepticism and sharp humor, asked him to come on and tell his story. Jonathan hesitated. This wasn't a safe space. This was a spotlight that could burn. But he remembered Michael's words. Tell the truth, even when it costs you. Asterisk. So he said yes. The studio lights were blinding. The host leaned in, smirking. So, you had coffee with God in an alley. Jonathan didn't flinch. I didn't have coffee with him. I encountered him, and he spoke to me. The host raised an eyebrow. And you expect people to believe that? Jonathan's voice didn't shake. I expect people to hear it. What they do with it is up to them. The audience was silent. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. And for a split second, Jonathan felt it again. That same presence, in the middle of a place where no one expected it to be. The host blinked, glanced at his notes, and for the first time in the interview, didn't know what to say. Jonathan just sat there, calm, steady, the warmth still in his chest. This was the moment he realized, it wasn't about convincing anyone. It was about planting something they couldn't unhear. The interview aired that night. Jonathan didn't watch it. He didn't need to. Instead, he sat on his porch, a cup of tea in his hands, watching the slow blink of stars overhead. The air was cool, but the weight in his chest wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. His phone buzzed, but he didn't pick it up. It kept buzzing, messages, missed calls, notifications stacking like waves against a shoreline. Finally, curiosity got the better of him. One text caught his eye. It was from an unknown number. You don't know me, but I was watching your interview tonight. I was planning to end my life. Then you said God hasn't left us. I don't know why, but I'm still here. Asterisk. Jonathan sat back, eyes stinging. There were more messages like it. People sharing moments, confessions, wounds they'd hidden for years. Some still didn't believe his story, but others, they believed enough to hope. And hope, Jonathan thought, is enough to save someone's life. In the weeks that followed, the noise around his career didn't quiet. Some studios distanced themselves. Some offers disappeared. Friends in the industry warned him he'd gone too far. But something unexpected happened, too. Independent filmmakers reached out, ones who weren't afraid of his faith. Churches invited him to speak. Community groups asked him to share his encounter. And every time he told the story, the same thing happened. That presence, the warmth from the alley, would return. Subtle, quiet, but there. One night, after speaking to a small group in a community center, an older woman approached him. Her hair was silver, her hands worn from years of work. "Son," she said, "I believe you. Not because you told me, but because I met him once too. In a hospital room, when I thought I was dying." Jonathan smiled. "Then you know how hard it is to explain." She nodded. "Some things aren't meant to be explained. Just shared." That night, Jonathan understood something new. The encounter hadn't been just for him. It was a seed meant to be planted in others. Months passed. Life didn't return to normal, it became something different. He still acted, still worked, but now, every role, every conversation, every chance to speak carried a deeper weight. It wasn't about image anymore. It wasn't about keeping doors open. It was about truth. And then, one evening, Jonathan found himself back in the city where it all began. The same streets, the same winding alleyways. He walked without thinking, his feet carrying him toward that place. And there it was, the alley. He stepped inside, heart beating faster, not out of fear, but anticipation. "God," he whispered, "I don't know if you'll meet me here again. But, thank you for that night." The wind shifted, cool and gentle. And in that quiet moment, Jonathan felt it, not as strong as before, but enough to know. He wasn't alone. A single streetlight flickered overhead, casting a warm glow across the cracked pavement. Jonathan stood there a while longer, eyes closed, breathing it in. When he finally walked away, he didn't look back. Because he knew, once you've truly encountered God, you carry him with you. Everywhere. And nothing, not even the loudest voices of doubt, can take that away.